Well, hello everyone. Thank you for this invitation to talk on the Stack Day. It's my first time here, and I think it's a good opportunity for us, especially for me. I can try to practice a little bit my presentation skills and share a little bit of my knowledge on Sitecore. Well, today we're going to talk about the Sitecore deployments and the risks. But first, I'd like to say a few words about me. Everyone knows me already. I'm Jose Neto. I'm a Sitecore developer here at Nishtech, just beginning, but I've been working for Sitecore in the last 3 years. And I try to help the community sharing through my website some articles, some blog posts. You can find me on Twitter as well. I'm trying to improve my models as well. And let's start. Well, this presentation is basically divided in three main areas. First would be the scenarios, like standalone, scaled. The second would be more about the deployment procedure itself. And the third one would be about the risks. But first, I'd like to talk to you about a very important product that we have in our society, which is the beer. Probably you guys love the beer, as we Brazilians love the beer as well. And as we all know, it's a very complex process. It all starts with the malt. That's one of the main ingredients. And we have a lot of process on that until the beer is like ready and packaged. And in this process, it requires a lot of caution, a lot of techniques. And when it's ready for the distribution, we think nothing goes wrong. It's just a matter of delivering the product. But sometimes even just a small detail like a simple curve can end your delivery. And this is why you need to be aware of the importance of the delivery process on the software development. Sometimes, despite your development effort, if you have a problem on this process, on the delivery process, you can have a big problem.
That's a sad picture.
Yeah. Well,
Kevin is crying here.
Yeah, this is something that heavily affected us all, right?
Yeah.
Well, we must remember like the two goals of the delivery. First would be the client satisfaction, and the second one would be the quality of the product. So we must try to remember of these goals when we try to deliver our products to their clients. Well, let's talk about deployments. Some tips on the deployment process. The first one would be to keep all the relevant information on a file. So you should create a text, and this text should contains all the Sitecore items and sub-items that must be published to the web database. It is also important you have noted all the information relative to the servers, their credentials prior to the deployment. You must write down the files that you touched. So let's create a scenario for that. Well, this would be our scenario. In this task, we need to update a rendering on the home page. So let's simulate that is our text file. So I'm going to write down the steps. So first one would be connect to the Sitecore environment website. The second would be a simple installation of a package, right? So install the package. I call it homepage update 1. And 3, the process is done. So this should be pretty straightforward, right? And then we get this file and we're gonna start the deployment process. Now, and when you're gonna install this, this pop-up will fortunately show up to you, and this is when you realize that you forgot to write one step. So even this small deployment, you must try to write down all the steps, and if you're able, try to test this deployment, or at least on your machine, so you can double check your steps. So in this deployment, we have this simple pop-up that it shows to us, and maybe you are on the production environment installing this package. It is like it's not an automated installation. You have to manually install that, and you have to choose that: overwrite, merge, and skip. And here we have a few possible outcomes. You can select the overwrite, and you can select the merge. You're probably not going to select the skip because none of that will be executed, right? So you select the first one, would be the overwrite. In the overwrite, as I said prior, you forgot to write that step. You basically delete all the files below the home page. Believe me or not, I already saw that. People with this problem just missed this step. And if you choose a different, would be the merge, another version of that file would be created, and it is cool. So we can extract a lesson from this quick exercise. You can test your deployment, or test your package, or test your steps, and you really need to try to add a detailed description of those steps. So the next thing that we're going to talk is about the organization, right? So you must try to organize the content that would be deployed. You can try to create a folder with in a way that your team can understand, and you can try to create a standard for you as well. So you can create a folder with the deployment package. You can give you a meaningful description with the Jira ticket, for instance, so you know what you will deploy. And you also can create a backup folder and place the files over there as well. So try to keep that organized. Another kind of the deployment we have the selective deployment, and we also have the full deployment. The selective deployment is when you're gonna just perform a deployment of a single file. In this case here, we have this mysite.css. So maybe you have a change on your website, and you can, instead of perform a full deployment, which is deploy a tons of files, or you can deploy just one file. So this would be the selective deployment concept. And the full deployment is when you're gonna deploy all the files. You will have some situations that you can choose one or another. If you're fixing a bug, maybe in the front-end side, in this case, you can use this selective deployment approach. If you're deploying a new version of the software with a lot of changes, or like 2 months of development, you can try to use the full deployment approach. So you have to see your needs and try to decide which would be the best alternative for you. And well, Deployment procedure always involve risks, regardless of whether Sitecore is a standalone or if you have a more robust infrastructure. Sometimes things can go wrong and the website can break. So it is also important to have a kind of a continuous plan already placed, so you can know and you have the steps to perform a rollback plan. And well, we have two crucial points here to be evaluated. Would be the file restoration, when you can just perform you can restore the files. So if you made a selective deployment, you can just restore that file. Or if you have to restore all the website data folder. You also must consider the Sitecore items. So if you deployed Sitecore items, how are you gonna to restore those items? You maybe have an IT package, so you can restore all just those items, or you can restore all the database as well. And if you take in account that you're restoring the database, you must remember that's gonna take a while. You can also restore the VM machine, uh, and you can also make you could also create a temporary database and change the and restore the database. So there is a lot of ways to perform that, but in a nutshell, you must have your rollback plan in place before you start that. So let's talk about the database backup. Like Sitecore items are usually included in the backup, right? In many cases, your deployment package will include the Sitecore changes. So please perform a backup from all the database. Usually, they are the core, the master, and the web database. Sometimes you may have the preview database that may be also important to the stakeholders as well. So it's very important you have this kind of backup, and it's more important you have automated backups in place. This is a common practice around the market nowadays, so it's also highly recommended. Oh, DLL versions. The developer can also change the DLL version or the revision for each deployment. This will make it clear which DLL would be deployed. So in order to accomplish that, you as a developer, you need to open the assemblyinfo.cs on the project and update the assembly version, as you can see on this picture here. All right, so now let's talk about the deployment scenarios, the standalone one. Well, the deployment is performed when you have the content managed and the content delivery instance on the same instance, right? So even you have the database, they're not shared, you still have the same files on the server. And this scenario is highly risky due to the IIS reset. It will kick the users out of a Sitecore and the users browsing your website at the same time. And like any trouble during this deployment, you would like to be reverted as quick as possible to avoid the downtime. So before you deploy on this kind of scenario, make sure you inform all the stakeholders before this happens, right? And let's talk about the deployment on the CM server. The tip would be ask all your Sitecore content authors to disconnect before you start the deployment on the CM server. Then start the deployment on the CM server, and you can also try to double check the changes on the CM server. You can also ask your client or your QA team to validate your deployment on CM server, so you can minimize the deployment risk before you move on to deployment on CD server. You must also publish the Sitecore items to the database And if you have the preview or a pre-prod database, you can also perform those tests on the preview database to help you to minimize the risks on the deployment on the CD server. The deployment on CD server, you will basically copy the files over the CD server. The items will be published to the web database. And if you have just one CD server, it still can be very dangerous procedure. Well, next scenario would be a multiple server scenario. So like if you have two servers and a load balance, this is an excellent scenario to avoid the downtime of your website. On the first column, we have the number 1 there. It shows you the current scenario, both CD1 and CD2 online. The number 2, you need to put the CD server 2 under maintenance and remove from the load balance. On the step 3, you should restore the latest web database backup as like a web temporary database and change the file on the connection strings.config and points the CD2 to the web temporary. And the number 4, you can test internally if CD2 is working and put CD2 back on the load balance. This number 5 here would be the first slide on your left. You can remove the CD1 from the load balance, deploy files on the CD1, and publish the items to web database. Then you should test the CD1 internally. And if the tests were okay, you can continue the deployment procedure. On the number 6, the second slide, you should put the CD1 back on the load balance. This deployment is done for the deployment is basically done for the CD1, right? And on the 7, remove the CD2 for the load balance again, point the CD2 to the web database again, copy the files over the CD2 file system, and check the CD2 to see if it is working. And number 8, you can put the CD2 on the load balance again, and the deployment is completed. So this is a very good procedure to avoid downtime. I know it's a lot of steps, but it can lead your deployment to 0. So we also have the blue and green approach, which would be a scenario that you have two identical production environments labeled as blue and green. So in this case, it's a very similar to what we did. It is a more robust infrastructure that can help you which achieve the same goal, which would be to lead to a 0 downtime deployment. So the infrastructure is something very important, and it should be considered this as an issue or the happiness of our client. Now, let's not talk about the scenarios anymore. Let's talk about let's talk about some tools that you can use to perform the deployment. First one that you present, it is the Sitecore installation wizard. The installation wizard can be accessed through this path /sitecore/admin/update installation wizard. And this wizard allows you to install the package that you generated on a TDS package, and basically install using this tool. But for using that, you must be familiar with the TDS as well. So you have the TDS deployment manager as well. And this manager helps you to configure the deployment on the TDS. It enables the user to select which items do you want to include on your deployment. This can include templates, renders, or anything that you think that is important as well. And you can also choose if the item should be deployed once or should be deployed always, or if their children should be deployed as well. We also have the publishing profiles. The publishing profiles can be configured within the Visual Studio. It is an important feature to be configured on the TDS deployment as well. You can create a building profile for each user on your company or for each environment that you have, and you can combine those two things that will be helpful on your deployment package. And here, let's do a quick discuss about what should we add to the TDS. When you're gonna generate a package, this is a question that we usually have on the companies. Which items should we add? Because if you add everything that you have on the project, your project can be huge. So if you're creating a project, maybe probably you should add the templates, you should add the system changes that you made, you should add the layout. The media library is probably too big and should not be considered. You should add as well the main extractors for the content. In this case, you have the global configurations, global components, and sites. But it may change due to your delivery. If your delivery it is a component itself with an image, then maybe in this particular case, you should add your image to or your component to the media library and deliver this to the client. So it is something that is not like a closed conversation. It will depends on your needs, but usually for a development perspective, you should try to keep that lightweight, which would be removing images or remove a big structure of content. So if you can just leave the basics there, it is good for the deployment. Another thing that we have it is the XML transformations. So the XML file should be also configured for each publishing profile during the package generation. So the XML transformation will generate the file for the desired environment. So what does that mean? If you have that in this sample here, an example prod CM or prod CD, it means that you can configure a different configuration for each environment, right? In this case, for the production CM, and a different configuration for the production CD. Sometimes this is required for patching purposes, and sometimes for the developers as well. So in this case, we have here pipelines Neto, right? So this would be the configuration for my environment. Another thing that you have here, it's the final setup for the TDS package. Here I'm showing how to generate that package. So you should mark that, which is the generate package during the build. And when you perform the build, the TDS will generate a file to you that can be installed in that tool, in the wizard tool that I showed you earlier. So here you should fill the fields here, which would be the name of the package, the author, the version, give some information about what's been installed, maybe the Jira tickets as well. And there we go. We have the package generated here. Well, and for the deployments, we have a new trend, which is the unicorn. Probably you already heard about it. And well, how unicorn works? Well, unicorn is a tool that is not there to override to overwrite like the TDS, but has almost the same features, and it's being well spread out because the Habitat project. So some difference that you have, it's the TDS, the unicorn creates some files. So you don't have an unicorn project as well. And one thing that you have differently would be you have a control panel on the unicorn, and it will serialize in a rainbow format, as you can see in this picture as well. So why unicorns so popular? Because it is first, if you download the Habitat project, we have this already there. Second, it's free Sitecore module available on the marketplace. Anyone can download there. The TDS, you need a license for that. It helps you to automate the serialization. It is also very easy to synchronize the files. You don't have to do much. It will serialize very easily and quickly for you. And it's a little bit harder to configure than TDS. And this is the picture from the unicorn on the control panel. Well, we also have the automated deployments tools, right? Well, this kind of tool, like the Team City, and you have another similar tools. They will deploy your file automatically. It will be also connected to the TDS, to your repository. It automates your deployment and reduce risk of issues. And you can also deploy to a specific environment. Like in this case here, we have a deployment for quality assurance. We have the deployment for just a dev environment. We have this health check, which will check if your project is buildable, if you are able to build that. So this kind of tool is gaining strength on the market, and it's pretty cool to have it. And well, we have some main players on this, which would be the Octopus deployment, the JetBrains Team City, and we also have the Jenkins. So this finalized the second part of the presentation, which will be our review on the procedures of the deployments and the kinds of deployments. And now let's move on the subject and talk a little bit about risks. As you can see here, risk is a defined variable that can take a value that endangers or eliminates the success for a project. So let's see the first risk: date and time and Friday, right? So preferable, perform the deployment at the beginning of the week. It is important to remember that any functionality implemented may generate a problem. If it is on Monday or Tuesday, the team can like perform the analysis and execute the rollback plan. The deployment on Friday can be very dangerous. Assume that any problems that you have on the Friday afternoon, like your deployment is Friday afternoon, and you detect this problem just on the early Saturday, right? in which case your team will be available just to analyze that or help you out on the Monday. So your site will be probably problematic for 2 days. So the ideal time for deployment can vary according to your infrastructure. For a less robust infrastructure deployment, it is recommended to deploy during a time when there is a less traffic on the website. For a more robust infrastructure with multiple instances, considering that you have also redundancy, the time may be not an issue. It can be deployment on normal business hours, right? A second one would be the number of functionalities. So if you are deploying a small number of fixes that can be easily tested, this will probably minimize the risks of encountering issues during the deployment. But if you have a lot of functionalities, this can make your deployment to take more time because probably you need to double check the deployment. The QA will also check that. This will increase the time and can make the time used for this deployment will increase a lot, and maybe such the fallback. So this is a very, very important variable to consider. So let's try to classify the risks by infrastructure type. For a standalone perspective, a standalone server, we can classify that as a high risk deployment. For CM and CD nodes, we can classify that as a medium risk. For CM and CD2, with 2 or more CD nodes using that procedure that we talked about in this presentation, you can classify that as a low risk deployment. You can also classify the risk by the deployment method that you have. If you have a manual deployment, you can classify this as a medium risk. If you have an automated deployment, you can classify this as a low risk deployment. Let's classify the risk by the deployment time, as we talk about if it is a Friday deployment, if for deployment on a business hours or non-business hours. So for a Friday deployment, I would classify that as a high risk deployment. If you are on a business hours, it is a high risk, but if you are standalone, so this will vary due to infra. If you have robust infrastructure, maybe this cannot be a problem. Well, if it is not known business hours, I would classify that as a low risk. Well, you can try to classify the risks by a number of functionalities as well. So between 1 and 3, a low risk. Between like 3 and 5, medium risk, and more than 5, we can classify that as a high risk deployment. So if you put all this information on the table, and you can try to create a risk assessment matrix and try to understand the severity, the impact, and how to mitigate those risks. So let's try to create an exercise here. Well, the scenario is that one. The client has a standalone Sitecore server. It is a manual deployment, and it is scheduled to begin at 5 a.m. The database, the backup database, and the files are ready. It seems a small functionality. So let's put all those variables on the same place and put the severity. So for the infrastructure, we have classified that as a high risk. The impact of that would be the temporary unavailability of the website, and for the client, probably to affect their brand, right? And how to mitigate that, and how to explain that to the customer. We can try to explain that and say to the client to invest in their infra, or when they have money for that. Another risk would be the automated or manual deployment. So in this case, the client doesn't have automated tool, so we'll need to perform a manual deployment on their servers. So the impact, manual deployment can lead to small errors, as we saw that today. Some small step can be missed, and some functionality can be affected or can be later detected. So how to mitigate that? We can try to perform a smoke test and check if nothing is broken. Another variable that you have here would be the business or non-business time. So in that case, we have the client asked us to perform 5 a.m. So we don't have another window to perform that. He wanted in that time, so would be a low risk because he think his clients will be not accessing the site during this time, so it would be a low risk. The impact of that, it may lead to an IS reset. If someone is buying products on the site, it can affect this purchase as well. So we are trying to mitigate that already, perform this deployment in morning. And another variable here would be the functionality. So it seems a small functionality, so I will classify this as a low risk deployment for this variable. And well, the impact of that can be a component that can break partially the page, but maybe not disrupt the entire website. And a way to mitigate that, we can try to test the functionality after the deployment. So you have a lot of scenarios and a lot of variables that you should analyze before you perform a deployment. And one thing that may be very important as well would be the deployment agreement. What is the deployment agreement document? Well, the deployment agreement document is a document that you can try to clarify to the client those kind of things, like first the date that you will perform this deployment. In this case, January 1st at 5 a.m. So the second one would be the rollback responsibility. So if you have a problem, who is going to be perform the deployment? Is it you? Is it the client? If it is the client, and if it is 5 a.m. Problem, their infra guys would need to be awake and ready to perform this deployment in case they need as well, right? So the time to roll back, this is a very important. How long you need to perform this rollback? If you have a problem, it depends of the size of this deployment. It can take 20 minutes, 1 hour, or need to spend a whole day perform your deployment, right? So this is something that you can include on your deployment, and also it's very important. Another thing would be the feature that you are deployment, like I put that like the work order 25, that probably the client knows what is the work order or the Jira ticket or the version of the software that you are deploying. So this deployment agreement, it will put all the responsibilities for each team, for your responsibility as a vendor and the responsibility of the client as well, because sometimes the client has a very poor infra, and you have a great team, great professionals, and you can have a problem on this deployment, right? And the client probably will try to blame you on that, but you can try to minimize that this problem with the client. How? With the deployment agreement, showing them the risks of this deployment, not because you don't have like good professionals, but you don't have the the a robust infrastructure in place. So you kind of transfer the risk of the business from you to the client, because usually the client will try to blame you for a problem, uh, and he's not probably, sometimes they don't know that exists a better infrastructure. Sometimes they know that they have a poor infrastructure, but they just don't have the money or the will to improve that. So that's the importance of the deployment agreement. Everyone must be aware of the problems that the client has, or the clients that the client can have, and how this can affect their brand, right? So that's it. Well, thank you very much. I hope this can be helpful to you in a way. Here's my blog and my mail, and I'm here available for Skype, of course. And thank you very much. That's it.
Excellent.